There's a big conversation about the gender pay gap and why are so many women underpaid. It's a question that we've been engaging since the world marked the World Equal Pay Day. But let's have this conversation because it's very important, especially when we are facing an economic crisis. This then becomes even accentuated, and then it now becomes an issue that you need to address head on. Let's spend some time looking at that, shall we? Now, the data is pretty startling. It tells its own story, and we've been looking at that since the Statistical Service put it up. And this is a number that got many talking, because women in Ghana are paid 34.2% less than men. It's just a startling reality of where we are. And this is where they do the same jobs. In other words, another woman in my position, as far as the case of the law of averages is concerned, will be paid 34.2% less than I'm paid. That's just a reality. Of course, in every situation there'll be outliers, but this is a general story of most women and men doing the same jobs across the country. Why is it a big deal? It is a big deal because when we come to what the law says, it tells you that there is discrimination at all levels. And this is a clear violation of the rules and the laws, the labor laws that govern this particular country. And by the way, Ghana is not the only country doing this. It's not in isolation, because you have the world where you have 20%. The gap there is 20% in terms of the less pay between men and women. And so this is a global picture, 20%. And then if you look at the Ghana-specific situation, which we talked about already, it is 34.2%. So Ghana is way above the global average on this question. But it is a reason why we have seen agitations in parts of the world, in the Western world in particular, not so much in this part of the world, but we've seen this protest, the agitation from women's groups and women professionals who are demanding that they are paid equal pay for doing the same work. Footballers, for example, have come in for strong notice. We had, for example, the United States football team and other football teams protesting because they believe that the men are being paid far more. Meanwhile, they're all playing football on the same pitch and kicking the same round plastic object on grass. So they should be paid at least equally. But what about the question of equity? Where does that come in here in this conversation? Because globally, there's a problem. Ghana, of course, is telling the story that we are really above the global average. And so maybe it's more pronounced in this country than in many other parts. Now, another very important point to look at is now, how does this then reflect in a scenario where you earn, say, 5,000 cedis, right? So this is a scenario we've created based on the statistics and the percentage you see up here, 34.2%. So if you're working with the statistics, for a man who earns 5,000 cedis for doing the same job in that same position, the woman will earn 3,294 cedis. Why? What is accounting for this difference? Because you all do the same job. And in many cases, the women do a far better job than the men. So why is this? That the man is earning 5,000, the woman is earning 3,290 for doing the same thing. Why? The difference is 1,710. And that is significant in an economy like this, where our incomes have been eaten by inflation. So we begin to see, and women really carry a bulk of the burden. They are most often than not taking care of the children at home in many communities across the country. And so this poverty situation then leaves women heavily reliant on men. And then that perpetuates this visual cycle of male dominance and chauvinism and etc. And then that's what the gender advocates have been pushing and making an argument for it to be dealt with. That tells a picture. And then the story is very, very clear looking at this particular issue here. But then you look at other factors that also play into this gap, this difference that we see. So for people who have tertiary certificate, among people with tertiary certificate, the gap is 12.7%. And you begin to see a certain interesting trend. For when there's no education, the gap is wider, way wider. We're talking about some 54% there. So the less education you have, the wider the wage difference, the wider the pay difference. That's in essence what this picture is saying to you. But even more alarming is that no education is at least better than basic education in terms of the gap. Why is that? That's another very interesting point. And this is Ghana specific, by the way. No education is better than basic education. They are both bad in comparison to tertiary education. This shouldn't even exist at all. You want to reduce it to zero, which is what the campaign is about. But if you look at it closely, if you're holding among people holding basic education certificate, the gap is 60.1. That is huge. And this then plays out when you look at the types of jobs. So in the public sector, that's where the wage difference, the pay difference is smaller. So what is it that the public sector is doing that, say, the private formal sector isn't doing? Because there you have the gap at 29.9%. What can we learn from here? What is the public sector doing that has closed the gap between men and women to 10.5%? When we're talking about a national average of 34.2%. Clearly, the private sector needs to learn here because there is a subject of discrimination we'll come to. But then it's even more pronounced in the private informal, where you have 58.7% disparity. And we're talking about private informal, like the shops where you go in your local community. Some you bring in the shops that you attend and buy your stuff in the grocery shops where the owners will employ somebody, for example, and pay them. If they in that shop that you like to visit in your neighborhood, if they employ a man and they employ a woman, and in that shop there are two people there, a man and a woman, chances are, according to this, the man that you meet in that shop will be paid the gap there, the difference between what he will earn and the lady in that shop will be 58.7%. That is unacceptable by all standards. You want to move it to here, right? In other places, people protest because the data is telling a story. They protest with their feet. Where there's gender and there's no inclusivity and equal pay, well, customers will protest with their feet and with their purchases. They would come in and say, well, we're not going to buy from this particular shop because there the discrimination, the gap is wider. It's a form of a protest. We're not seeing that here in this part of the world. We'll explore that. And then there are age factors as well, because what you begin to see is that the older you get, the bigger the gap. I mean, the disparity isn't as huge as when you compare to, say, the various sectors, but there it is, 15 to 35%. You're talking about a gap of 30.7%, and then you go to 36.60 years, you're talking about 33.4%. So that gap there, yes, is there's a difference there. The older you grow, but it's not as bad as we've seen before. But the key question to look at is, in terms of bridging this gap, what is the global picture? We learn that it will take the world 131 years to bridge this gender gap, right? And in terms of rankings, Ghana is at 45% out of 146 countries. But the most startling revelation from the global picture is just the number of years it will take to bridge the gap. Many of us won't be alive to see that day, if that day ever comes. 131 years. That tells you how bad the problem is, how bad this is across the world. And then you look at our score, not so good, but we're doing far better than many countries. If you're 45%, we're on 45% out of the 146 countries, 45th out of 146 countries. This is 45th, 146 countries there. Now, if you come to the Labour Act, that tells its own story. And for me, this is a more important one because it's written in law that every worker shall receive equal pay for equal work without distinction of any kind. But there is a distinction here. Does it amount to discrimination, knowingly or unknowingly? And if the law says it, how do we enforce it? They're having that conversation with my guest next. Stay with me. And thanks for staying with us here on PMS. It's a conversation that I'm pretty sure you're all curious about. Why, in God's name, are we paying women far less, 34.2% less than we pay men when you're doing the same job? Okay, we'll get into that pretty shortly with my guests. But remember that PMS is always brought to you by Syntax Tanks. It is good, it is strong, it is tough. It's also brought to you by Lobo Bitters. Experience greatness in every moment. Ghana AIDS Commission as well. And I strongly recommend Syntax Tank to you because no matter your water needs, Syntex tank has it all. Syntex tank is first to introduce the double layer tank, and now you can have as many layers as you want. Syntex tank is first to introduce the white inner layer tanks in Ghana. We now introduce you to the customer specs order, which lets you order any color and size of preference. Syntex tank gives you the longest warranty of 7 years, which no other tank gives you in Ghana. So whatever your water consumption, size of project or demand, choose Syntex tank. We have agents nationwide. Call us on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. Syntex tanks, A strong, A tough. Guests with me in the studio today is Anthony Odro Intra. He's a labor economist. He's a statistician with the Ghana Statistical Service as well. Thank you very much, Anthony, for joining us on PM Express.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Professor Georgina Odro, who is the director of the Center for Gender Research and Advocacy at the UCC. And I'm delighted that she can join us, because you can never have this conversation when there's women on the wrong side of the pay equation and not have a woman in this conversation. So I'm delighted that she can definitely join us. Doc, I'm grateful that you can have, we can hear your thoughts on this very important subject. Also joining me is Senor Ajabing. He's a labor analyst and is with me in the studio. Hello.
Hi.
Great to have you. We'll be joined shortly by Alex Frimpong. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Employers Association. They employ. And so why in God's name are they paying women so poorly in comparison to the men? We'll ask him that question when he joins us. And I want to start with Professor Georgina Odro, as the Director of the Center for Gender Research and Advocacy. And you are into research, but you are also a woman. So I want to start there. I want to tap into that experience. And before I even go into the data and what the research says, etc., in your own line of work, in your profession as a professor, is this something that you can relate to?
Hello and good evening from Cape Coast University. I hope my voice is loud enough and my audience can hear me.
Yes.
I also want to make a correction. I'm the former director. I just handed over last month, so I've ceased being the director. Wow. But I'm happy to still share. Great. And I'm a professor with the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, so I'm still at the university. Okay. So you mentioned that, well, in terms of research and also from my own experience, yes, this is a very interesting but also relevant topic. And we know that the 18th of September annually is used to observe this globally. And it is very true. But then, like you introduced in your statistics, I was really enjoying the statistics. The issue is that there is gender pay gap or gender wage gap, whatever you may want to call it, and then which shows the difference between earnings of women as against men. But when you take the picture in totality, it is better to approach it from the formal and then the informal sector. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the informal sector statistics, definitely women are the majority within the informal sector, and there are so many gendered reasons why women are so. When it comes to, because your data show the role of education, for example, the fact that those who have had no education at all have, and then those with basic education, and education is a very, very important factor when it comes to the gender wage gap. And the data also shows that with tertiary education, comparatively, the gap is closed compared to the basic, and then also the. So the reason why education becomes important first has to do with something we know, something known as gendered subject within the school system. So per our socialization at the home, prior to entering the school, women often perform the domestic chores. So the tendency for parents to groom their daughters to pick courses which will allow them time for family life is one such factor. So for example, parents may encourage their daughters to read courses that will take them into teaching or courses that will take them into nursing so that they'll have more time for their family. And when that happens, it means that time spent on the job is less. And also these are not higher paying jobs. When it comes to them, yes, that is one of the key factors, because in teaching, that is one factor. When it comes to,
I mean, I'm curious. I mean, pardon my interruption, but in teaching, I mean, you are a professor, and I was curious to ask at the beginning. Exactly, yes. I'm curious to ask at the beginning. I mean, whether you personally, whether you relate to what we are talking about.
Yes. So I'm coming to that point. In terms of relationship with the public sector, as you rightly said, if I'm a professor and my male colleague is also a professor, definitely the salary is the same. It's the same flat rate.
Okay.
But there are other factors that allows my male partner to earn more than I would. And some of these factors has to do with research, for example, because like you mentioned, I was the head of that center, which is a research center. And then as a professor, you need to research and publish to gain your professorship. And this is where the difference comes up, because women will have to commit more time to the home. We juggle between the gender roles, the care roles, the mother role, the marriage. You also show the statistics where the age between 15 to 35 years versus 36 to 60 years differ. And the reason for that, I'll come back to my experience, but the reason for that is that normally around that 30, mid-30s, people may be making families. And when you are making families, it means that you need more time for your family life. But from 15 to 35, they may be single, they may have time for their work and other things. So it improves upon their earning. With the experience, as I said initially, in terms of the public sector, if it's a professor, it is flat, it's same. But the difference come about through the extra work that men tend to have time to do, that women wouldn't have that much time to do. And as I said, research is what gives us extra income. Lecturing, all these titles, all the sleepless nights, all the stress, our salary is peanuts. And sometimes when people even hear it, they marvel. And if you compare salary to sometimes students even outside, like $1,000 equivalent, which is really grossly disrespectful if you don't mind. So you make the extra money through research. But to what extent can I commit enough time for research compared to my male colleague?
And you raise a very important point, and I'll come to the Statistical Service rep with us. Anthony, are these the reasons, and of course you were just guarding the data, but in there, did you try to nuance it a bit more to sort of tease out some of these reasons? These are profound reasons.
Thank you, Ivan said. Let me thank you for the opportunity to be here. Let me also seize the moment to thank the management and staff of Ghana Statistical Service, and in particular the government statistician, Professor Samuel Kwabena, whom I admire so much. And usually, he would have been here, but he's asked that I represent him, so I'm actually representing him. And then the entire service, I really admire him whenever he appears here on the screen. So I'm happy for his excellent leadership at the Ghana Statistical Service. Having said that, so I want to say that I think Professor has broken it down and probably touched on exactly what the data is pointing out to. It's very, very interesting. So, yes, talking about the factors that accounted for this gap that we are seeing. So I'll touch on 3 factors, which she's even touched on. So the first has to do with what we call the occupational segregation. And it's very important because under that, women continue to be underrepresented. I mean, when it comes to traditionally male-dominated jobs. And so, like she rightly pointed, even when a woman has same qualification as that of a man, and even better, they consistently receive low pay because of, the segregation. I would relate it to the data. So the data is actually pointing it out. Once you are talking about the employed population, then you obviously have to talk about the occupation and then the industry. The occupation, that's the classification by, the UN, what we call the ISCO, International Standard Classification of Occupations, and then the International Standard of Industrial Classification, the ISEC. And clearly, these two, so the first one I'm talking about being the occupational segregation, we saw in the data, there are major groups. So we have managers, professionals, technicians, and associates. And if you look at the data, clearly you see those in the managerial group, you see the skewness. Female being 4.8%, and then males 95%. So clearly you see the segregation there. If you take it further down, those in the professional group, we have 40% representing the female population as opposed to 60% of males. And even if you go further, technicians and associates, 53 as against 47. So clearly you see the segregation there. And I mean, if you take one example, Professor said that women or parents would not even encourage their children to take up jobs that wouldn't, if you like, courses that wouldn't let them get enough time even in their school going age. That is also very true because, I mean, it's only in recent times that the promotion of the STEM, encouraging, girls to take up science courses. It was interesting for me to hear my brother telling me yesterday, when he saw me, in this discussion that whilst in tech, during their days, engineering courses, they had only one female.
Traditionally, the sciences have not attracted.
That's actually one of the main reasons. Then I talk about the second factor, if you like, what we call the polarization of gender by industries. Again, Professor.
What does that mean?
So what that means is that, society perceives certain jobs, apart from the jobs, even the industry. So, for example, the teaching, the nursing that she spoke about. I think interestingly that if you hear that a male is actually a nurse.
Is that a reason? Because from the research, isn't that the case then that even among nurses, if there's a male and a female nurse, the assumption is, based on the data, that on the average, the male nurse may be earning more than a female nurse?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because actually this gap is not between a man and a woman with the same observable characteristics doing the same work. It is the average wage levels, so across sectors. So it's not actually between a man and a woman. But I will delve that into.
But it's a gender pay gap.
Yes. So the gender pay gap, it is not that. So like I said, it's the average. So you find women in certain, if you like, class or occupation who earn higher. Exactly.
Of course, but those would be outliers, right? That won't be the norm.
Yes, but so that's why then you need it.
The assumption is that generally men earn more than men.
No, so again we go back to the data. So then if you go to the informal sector, you get it. In the informal sector, you may not have women earning as higher as those, if you like, in the public sector or in those who hold managerial positions. So it's the average that we are looking at here. I think that's the confusion that people are getting. That.
So when you say, so it's good to break this down. So when you say in Ghana, women earn 34.2% less than men, what does that mean?
Okay, so basically what it means is that, so let's say women are supposed to be, both men and women are supposed to be paid equally. So let's use 5,000, assuming, there's an assumption that men and women are supposed to pay equally. So let's use 5,000. What it means is that women are paid 3,200.
Yeah, but so that isn't that the challenge we're talking about? So the woman will be paid. Is it for doing the same task?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily doing the same task, because the tasks are different.
Yeah.
We do different tasks. Different sectors and then different occupations. So it's not necessarily the same task. So that's why I'm saying that. Let's take.
But the question I have is, and I guess this is the everyday person's question to ask. So if we are paid 34.2% less than men, but you're not doing the same thing, of course, then there's a justification there, is it not? Because if I'm a broadcast journalist and you are a pilot, whether you are male or female, the pilot will earn more than a broadcast journalist.
So let's get this right. So again, this 34.2%, like I said, it is not for a single person. It's not the
averages.
The averages.
Yeah.
And it cuts across the different tasks. So it's not.
So regardless of what you do, on the average, women earn 34.2% less than men.
Exactly.
Regardless of what you do.
Because this is coming from the different tasks. When you are using the occupation, so your tax. So for example, somebody in the informal sector, let's say a salesperson. So a self-employed person, I've employed a sales girl to be going around for me. At the end of the month, I pay that person. The sales girl is performing a different task than a pilot a female pilot, if you like, whose task is different from this sales girl. At the end of the day, it's the different tasks being performed by these different categories of, if you like, persons being engaged in economic activity.
Yeah,
that's what we have.
Mr. Jamila, but that's what I want to probe a bit more, because if that's what it is, then what's the issue?
Well,
I'll come to you. I know you have it, but what's the issue?
I think that the first confusion comes when you see the headline and it uses the word gender.
Exactly.
So once you see the word gender, then people want to immediately associate it with some form of discrimination. And it is easy to conclude that when you compare a male and a female in the same work environment, doing the same work, jobs, tasks, with the same qualifications and experience, then the man earns more.
Yeah, and that is really where, across the country, the problem had been. And we've seen the protests. That's what I raised. So footballers, female footballers, were protesting that their male counterparts weren't anymore. So that's what resonated with people.
But
not necessarily what...
Yes, exactly. But you see, this is not the only data that proves that across averages, there is a gap. But the gap is explained away using certain peculiar factors in the workplace that are akin to the male and the female. And that is some of the factors that Professor was trying to raise. And that is the same that he's raising. Let me give you one typical example. For example, between the genders, one party has a more affinity for risk, for example. So would take riskier jobs than the other. Meanwhile, the riskier jobs pay more. So if you have a number of females and you take that particular risky environment and you take the females will be less. So in totality, averages, the male will earn more than the female.
So I return to my question. Yes. So what is the problem with that? And I asked that question because for what you just said, that example, let's use that example. The riskier the job, the more it pays. And the assumption what you're saying is that men will be more attracted to the riskier job than women.
Yes.
Yeah, so they deserve to earn more than the women.
So the reason why we have to discuss this particular issue is that in the formal sector where there's more structure, you do not have these problems. But where in the informal sector, the informal sector proper, where discretion for employers increases as to what they would pay, you sometimes find, in a minimal situation, find certain discriminatory decisions taken against women. So for me, I am conservative in approaching gender pay gap discussions because the reason is the discrimination may occur where it is made possible. For example, in an informal sector where enforcement of the laws are not really big and employers have the right or can decide what they pay, then they may discriminate. So we need to discuss. But really, the figures always explain away the gap, which normally minimally lies on discrimination rather than the natural issues of the differences between male and female in the workplace.
Anthony.
Yes, so thank you, yes. But I still want to stress on the point that, so it is, again, I think that is the issue. It is not between men and women in a particular, if you like, economic activity, like the football.
Okay, it's not an issue of men and women doing the same job but earning different pay.
Exactly, because it's not the same. So what we are saying, this gap is not between a man and a woman with the same observable characteristics. Okay. This case, if they are footballers doing the same work, that is not it. That is not it because.
So explain, if it's not that, again, what is it?
So what it means is that we are, and this indicator is computed from paid employment. Under the status of employment, there are different categories. One of the categories is the paid employment. That is those who receive wage or salary when they perform in the kind of economic activity. So what we are saying is that different activities are performed by these, if you like, characters. So it is these different activities that are performed by these characters and what they earn.
Yeah. So I think I understand what you're saying. that, of course, you perform different activities. Some activities are more, I guess, and as you said, the example that Prof gave, for example, so a profession like nursing, you mentioned that too, right, is associated, rightly or wrongly, with women. Yeah, however, it is not as well paying compared to some other tasks. So you're saying that in that analysis, then you have a situation where the men will be paid far more than the men, because the women are being pushed into a certain profession which doesn't pay as much.
Yes.
For whatever reason, either for what the prof says, you have to go and give birth and you have to take care of the family, and so you rather want to go into teaching than go into engineering, yes, right? And so then you're going to be earning less. But the question about then, what is the problem then with that? Because the assumption had been that the discrimination question had been that somehow employers, whether in the informal or informal sector, were discriminating against women in this case. But now you explain it's not really that at all. It's not about gender, men and women matter.
So the nursing example as you give, so this nurse is performing a certain activity, different from what the engineer
is performing, of course, exactly. and therefore,
and the wage is different depending on the activity that they perform. So if a female engineer, based on her activities, let's say received 4,000 Ghana cedis, somebody in an informal sector, like the earlier example I gave, a sales girl finds herself in an informal sector, yet received, if you like, 1,000 cedis. So that is different from the 4,000. Then other characters also performing different activities. At the end of the day, when you strike the average, then you get this gap. So that's what I'm saying. This gap cannot be attributed to a specific, if you like, sector between a man and a woman. It doesn't work out that way.
Okay, I want to bring in the Employers Association, Alex Frimpong. Mr. Frimpong, thanks for staying on. I wonder what the Employers Association make of this, because really in the private formal sector, in fact, both in the private sector, private formal sector, the gap is there. But of course, it's and I'll come to the public sector scenario, because they have narrowed that gap to 10.5%. What is it that they're doing that the others aren't doing? The Ghana Employers Association, why is there this huge gap in the pay that you'd give and the reward that you give to employees if you're considering the gender question? Hello, Alex Frimpong. Okay, we don't seem to have him. Let's see if we can get him back so we can put that question to him. But I want to go back to Prof. Dr. Drew, the former director of the Center for Gender Research and Advocacy, and that subject we just delved into. And I want to ask you that same question. If it's about doing different things, as you've explained, a woman wants to go into nursing, where is the problem? Because the argument is, if you're doing something else...
I would want to... So let me cite the case of the UK, for example, because when it comes to formalization of work, it started during the Industrial Revolution in Europe. And then gradually, because work used to be within the informal sector in all societies, and then with the factory system and industrialization, work moved to the formal sector. So when it did, actually in the UK, because theirs is very much hourly based. So for example, you are a cleaner for 1 hour, and then the rate may be £5. So it's very clear. I schooled in the UK, so they may have the rate like this. Men can have £6 an hour, women can have £5.8 an hour, and children can have from 16 years and above, they're allowed to work. They can have £5.5 an hour. And the reason for this, they argued, is because women's income were seen as secondary or supportive. If you look at the gender role of men as the breadwinners or as the providers, so they assume that men are the main breadwinners who are going to provide for the family, and then the woman's income is an additional income. So they have that rate, which is very clear. Now, when you come to the Ghanaian scenario, and with the jobs like the public sector we are talking about, if I'm a lecturer, my colleague is a lecturer, we are all senior lecturers or associate professor, the rate is same. That is true. But it's the additional opportunity for income where the difference come in. Because here, the tendency for me to have less time for this additional work because of my family role is very high. But the men can have more time, do overtime. Even with the nursing example that he gave, men can do, if there is opportunities for overtime, men can stay on and do overtime, but the woman, because of the family care and other things, to go. So with the gender wage gap, it is the lump sum. When we look at all the average of women's income compared to the men income, men normally earn higher because they are into, like he said, more precarious work. They do more risky job, which is more paying. When they go to the mining sector, how many women are there when you come to STEM? And interestingly, now at the University of Cape Coast, where we have medical students, it's almost like 50% with the students enrollment, the male-female ratio. So we're very happy that, STEM is doing well. Women are getting into this area, because men used to be the doctors and women were the nurses, but now they are like almost at par, 49, 50% or 49, 51% male-female. But they told us, hold on, when it comes to the general medicine, that's it. But when it comes to climbing up into the professional rank, into the consultancies, into the surgeons, the specialists, then the gender difference comes up again. More men are able to go into these areas, and through that, they earn more.
Yeah,
so
I get a sense that to deal with that problem, then you have to deal with the societal, architecture, the societal's architecture that allows women or discourages women from climbing up the ladder. This glass ceiling that is placed.
Exactly. The concept of the glass ceiling.
That is how you, I guess, fundamentally can deal with this gap.
Yeah, and that's why there has been an improvement in terms of the gap. Like there has been a narrowing effect compared to how it used to be. And as you said, in 130 whatever years.
Yeah, it's taken 131 years to bridge this gap.
When we will not be alive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but please stay with me. I want to quickly bring in Alex Frimpong. He's the CEO of the Ghana Employers Association. Mr. Frimpong, do you feel responsible for this gap? I mean, as employers, for example. I mean, is it a problem with the way employers approach pay?
Well, thank you, Ivan. I don't think so. I don't think so in the sense that for the formal sector, when an employer needs an employee to do a piece of work, the issue is who can do the job and at what rate is the person going to get paid for that job. So the issue of gender disparity in pay more or less does not apply in the private sector, and I can say so for many public sector jobs. There's no discrimination in terms of pay for men and women in many organizations. Of course, there are historical rules that are now being challenged because women are entering deeply into these roles and performing even better. So these ones primarily may not be quite prevalent now than maybe yesterday. If you go to places like Anglo Gold, where I'm very familiar with, now you have women dominating the engineering field, civil, mechanical, electronic, electrical, and the record shows that they are performing far better in areas which previously were purely male-dominated fields. If you go to places like Nestle, they have an all-female section that the records show that they are always on target, safety records very, very high, and all that. So gradually, we are beginning to witness a situation where the women are doing far better in traditionally.
But if that's the case, the question then becomes: are you paying them, reflecting the value that you've just been describing?
Yes, because for these women, they are qualified, they are competent, they are knowledgeable, they are team players, and they are earning similar to what men in these roles earn.
And I like the use of the word similar. And that can be a very interesting way of actually escaping the reality. That the question is, are you paying them the same if they're doing the work and doing it well and also qualified?
Equal pay for work of equal value, it does not discriminate against men or women. Where the worker is delivering, it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman. The price of the job does not discriminate.
I mean, how do you deal with this problem, though?
Well, as you said in the beginning, then what really is the problem?
Yeah.
There seems really not to be a problem, but sometimes the headlines are over-sensationalized, and therefore it looks like there's a problem. But I will not shy away from saying that there is always some element of discrimination as a factor in some of the sectors, and especially in the very informal sector where the employer has more discretion to decide what they will pay.
And that would be a direct violation of the labor law.
Exactly. And so those violations are not uncommon. They may be rare or they may be common. You find it very much in the informal sector where sometimes the labor law is breached. But it is not a factor that is a headline factor that explains the gap difference. And so how we deal with this is to know that these things, there's a gap. That gap can be explained away, but there are certain factors that would still be a negativity and would adversely affect the female. And those have to be looked at and policy developed and also practice developed to overcome those limitations.
Can policy really address the challenge you're talking about, considering what Prof talked about, how she diagnosed the problem? If it is about society fundamentally dictating what the woman does and stereotyping their roles, as in do nursing, as in raise a family, and so take a job that will put less pressure on you. And even as very educated women still think like that. If that is the real problem, how do you deal with that? How does policy fix that problem?
So de-stereotype. So get policy to drive a movement where women would go into more of the riskier jobs, more of the higher paying jobs, and also to encourage women to take higher positions where the pay is higher. Now, this policy can deal with, so that, like we are seeing in, for example, HR, the area of HR, women are dominating HR now. Prof just said that in the medical field, the women are almost at par. We have the nursing field, women are dominating. But of course, men are also entering there. So in those areas, in engineering, in all of those other areas where it is known to be, look, in the mining sector, women are now driving trucks. Those huge trucks you find. Women are now driving it. We see women driving buses these days.
So you possibly have to be deliberate in crafting policies that encourages, say, the girl child into science, into maths, into those areas that traditionally has been dominated by boys.
Drive it beyond education for them to go into those professions.
So take it beyond education.
Yes.
And also, you can incentivize companies.
Perfect.
To say, for example, that the more women you employ in, say, a traditionally male-dominated environment, you probably get an incentive. You
have an incentive, a tax incentive, whatever incentive it is.
Okay.
So policy can drive this.
I wonder, Anthony, as you delved into the numbers, did you get any suggestions as to what people's thoughts are on how they believe this could be addressed, this gap can be closed?
Yes. So thank you, Evans. I thought I was going to mention, ways by which the gap can be addressed, during at the later stage of the conversation, but maybe I should talk about. But I wanted to talk a little about
the latter stage.
The latter
no, yeah.
All right, so
but you say you wanted to expand on the point.
Yes, expand on the point. The fact that the variations in the gap with respect to the public sector.
Yeah, and that is important. Yes.
So the 10.5, I think Prof has really brought it out. You can see that it's minimal. And she's mentioned that some of the attribute that is going further, especially in the lecturing field, what the man is able to do. So that's what we call the differences in attributes between men and women. So then you can see that could be probably the reason for which there's even some gap, even though the salary structure is supposed to be the same.
Yeah, and that's what she explained. So the wage is set.
Yes, over there.
Regardless of whether a man or woman. Yes. However, if you have more time to do more research,
that is where
you make more money.
Personal trait comes in, and I think I like that point. Then going into the private informal again, the fact that it's 58.7, very wide. The one of the issues affecting that has to do with social, what we call the decent work deficit. So, Prof mentioned about a woman, in her working life would marry maternity leave. Now, it's so clear that in the informal sector, where they don't enjoy social security benefit, a woman then would want to take up jobs that she could be able to do for lesser hours. When that happens, because that woman doesn't enjoy social security, unlike the public sector, she'll work for less hours. She'll be paid less, and obviously it will have impact on her salary. But in the case of the public sector, the salary is intact. So you can see already
But in there is actually also the question I asked to you at the beginning, which is how do you address it? The lesson there from the public sector is that the wage is set and it's very objective. It's structured. It's very objective. You know when you get into this position, this is what you get, whether you're a man or woman. Isn't that what the private sector should learn?
The challenge is that in the private formal, they may, because of the fact that they don't have the social security. In the private informal, this is the self-employed people who have set up their business. And then they've employed one or two people. They don't have that much extra to do what the public sector is doing. So what happens is that there's something we call the motherhood gap. And this woman takes up this job that will pay for less hours to be able to take care of the children. And sometimes they are forced to even take family or friends-oriented enterprises. So the solution is that there should be, number one, there should be equitable, share of family duties between men and women, and then childcare and elderly care. Number two, companies should have, policies that will work on a flexible working time. And then three, there's a need for companies to have programs that would train, as it were, women when they go.
Globally, it's going to take 131 years to bridge the gap. In Ghana, how long?
Well, I think we may have to do some projection.
If globally it's 131 years, in Ghana, what'd you guess?
I have no idea.
Can we ever bridge this gap?
I don't think so.
With such a huge informal sector.
Because we are more heavy on culture as well.
Yeah.
And that's one of the solutions where in the cultural setting, we must
So your verdict is, as far as Ghana is concerned, you don't think we can bridge this gap?
No.
In fact, can I just add this?
But 1 second.
Indicator 5.5.2, which has to do with social SDG indicator, has to do with female share in managerial position. Do you know that, the data also shows that about less than a quarter, 23.8% of women hold the managerial position. So clearly, if you have a lot of men holding managerial position, obviously this inequality. So we encourage more.
Yeah. Let me take a yes or no from Prof. Prof, can we ever bridge this gap in Ghana?
Yeah, I like your submission so far, and I like Senyor's submission where he talked about the need for organizations to be intentional with policies, because as he said, the case is structural, and if women are burdened with care rules, and as said, they are not climbing, not because they don't have the potential, they have the potential, but these other structural challenges are preventing them, then we need to, and if you consider that our informal sector is heavy, and that is where the discrepancy is really high, then we really need to work on that. But
so is it possible to bridge the gap?
It is, though it will take long, but it will take a really, really long time because of the heavy burden in the
so 131 years to bridge the gap globally. In Ghana?
Maybe 135 years. We work on the informal sector.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alex Report, thank you also. Thank you, gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your evening.